of course. Now, there are new taxes coming at play, or rather into effect, on the 1st of September. That is today. One of the taxes, let's talk about digital assets tax. And this is at a rate of 3%. Who does it impact? It touches on digital assets. Talk about cryptocurrencies, content creators, if you're selling music, if you're selling ebooks, if you're selling videos and documents online, this will impact you. It takes effect today. Apart from that, also we have export and investment promotion levy. And this one is rated in two folds. First of all, we have a rate of 17.5%. And these charges on imported clinker. Remember, clinker is an important component when it comes to manufacture of cement. So 17.5% rate on imported clinker, and that is meant to boost local uptake of clinker in the country. Then we have 10% rate on imported paper, sacks and bags. That is the second one, export and investment promotion levy taking effect today. And lastly, we have enforcement of electronic tax system. And this one will be calling for heavy compliance with electronic tax invoice management system, that is ETIMS. Now, how will it impact you? Initially, if you were to be penalized in this regard, you will pay up to 100,000 shillings. Now, they're trying to incentivize people to utilize ETIMS. And that means that the penalty will be twice the amount of tax due. Ken, I want to bring you in. Let's start with digital assets tax. Now, the world has been going digital heavy. Cryptocurrency has been on our tongues left, right, and center. Even so, recently at X, being run by Elon Musk, I think they've gotten a platform to facilitate exchange of crypto in a way. So crypto is something that we can't escape. Now, the government has seen an opportunity right there to tax digital assets, 3%. What do you think this will impact this digital revolution that we're seeing across the world?
Well, the world has gone digital, particularly after COVID, when a lot of people lost jobs and many of them found refuge in these digital spaces, these digital economies. You find young people getting gigs in the online space. So I think it's an area where government has to be particularly sensitive, because it's an area that is very price sensitive. So if you add taxes that tend to price people out, then it can become sort of an undoing measure. I think it's one of the areas that can create jobs. Kenyans have huge talents in particularly some of these sectors in the digital economy. And I think it would have been most ideal had that been stayed possibly for a couple of years until the economy, the digital economy, reaches its full maturity. I think this is a premature tax that might add to the cost of doing business and actually might make people a bit less competitive.
Did you feel the government is between a rock and a hard place in regards to motivating and sort of raising revenue? I mean, when it comes to tax targets, 2.7 trillion shillings, that's a lot of money to collect. And I can see why the government is looking at every emerging opportunity and to tax that. What should have been their thought process when it approaches this? Because I feel they're backed in a corner.
Well, that's a good point. The government badly needs cash to be able particularly to meet its obligations. But sometimes these trends of adding some of these taxes can be a bit myopic, in the sense that you end up adding more tax with the idea of raising more revenue. But you get to a point where people stop participating in those economic activities. They divest, they move to other parts of the world. So you have to be able to find that sweet spot of at what point can we put taxes to the point it doesn't become a disincentive. I think where we are right now, particularly if you look at all the other deductions that have been building up, talk about the housing levy, talk about the NSSF and the NHIF, I think it can get to a point where people say, why bother? Why don't I just operate in the informal economy? So it's important the government does not disincentivize people from participating in the formal economy.
Definitely. export and investment promotion levy. Now, Ken, this is quite interesting because clinker is a very key component when it comes to making cement in the country. Now, looking at 17.5% rate on imports for clinker, and the argument is we're trying to promote uptake or local uptake of clinker within the country. What do you think about this move by the government?
There is that concept in economics called the import substitution, where you try and encourage local production to the best that is possible and sort of like win the economy of imports. I think Kenya has the possibility of being a great production hub, but you can't achieve such objectives by making countries less competitive. What you want to do is ask what can make our production more competitive, so that you don't have to you're not really making the cost of production in Kenya higher just to be able to satisfy a few producers. So it's really about how can we become as competitive as the rest of the world in terms of clinker. How can we produce at the same cost in terms of the productivity, so that people opt for local products because it's better, it's cheaper, but not because the government has made imports less competitive. It should be about building local competitiveness that really at some point you want it to be freely competitive.
All right. And looking at that and how it impacts the construction sector, because this touches on cement, I mean, the first question will be, do we have enough supply of clinker? That is one. Secondly, how will it impact the price of cement if this is a critical component or when it comes to cement manufacturing? And lastly, now the overall impact on the construction sector. How do you respond to these three concerns, Ken?
Well, there's a big affordable housing program. And the reason that affordable housing program is supposed to be affordable, it's anchored on the idea that the cost of inputs will be much lower, whether it's the cost of land or the cost of cement. So it can end up being a sense of contradiction where you're trying to achieve a low-cost housing program, really, but the inputs are going up. Cement prices are going up. At some point, it becomes difficult for developers. So I think it's important to understand what the big picture is, which is, I believe, is to make Kenya a competitive place to be in terms of whether it's real estate, whether it's construction. So it means the inputs themselves have to be fairly competitive for that outcome to be possible. So the big picture needs to tie in with the small activities that are taking place on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, for the local manufacturers or makers of clinker, this is a welcome move. I remember, I think it was a couple of years back, I had a conversation with one of the biggest cement manufacturers in the country, and this is what one of the issues they're pushing. If you're producing something locally, why don't we protect the local market in this regard? So it seems it's moving towards that direction. And a good question has come through my ear. My director asked me, what is clinker? A lot of people are asking, I mean, what is this clinker? Sometimes it sounds like a good artist. Imagine if I introduce myself. Hello guys, my name is Clinker. I'm about to perform. So clinker is a mix of limestone and minerals that have been heated in a kiln and have been transformed by this heat. When limestone is converted to clinker, CO2 is released. Yeah, I know you know CO2, but this is a critical component when it comes to manufacturing of cement. Now, Ken, also we have 10% rate on imported papers, paper, sacks and bags. Now, this reminds me, because we've seen a lot of situation, we've seen the name of one of the lead manufacturing player in the country, right? And this brings me back to conversation about, the Webuye pan paper mill. Yeah, I remember back in the day, we used to have our books. It would be made locally. I don't know whether that's still happening, but when you impose, or rather have a rate of 10% on imported paper, sacks and bags, what does this mean on a larger context?
Indeed, no, this is very much connected to the previous conversation on clinker. The objective is very good. You want to have local production. You want to have as much produced locally as better. That's a good outcome that can help a country get good jobs. The problem is, how do you achieve that? And the best way to achieve it is to look at your factors of production and ask yourself, how can we be more competitive? This idea of import substitution, where you try and block all sorts of imports coming into the country, hoping that that will make you more competitive, that doesn't work. It's almost as if you are in athletics race. It's about you training better, having better shoes, better training, better equipment, but it's not really about blocking your neighbor from being able to run. Import substitution can be a populist policy that can be very dangerous. If you go to Brazil in the 1990s, the computer industry, they really said that they wanted to have the local computer industry develop. So they blocked all the big players coming into Brazil. And what happened was Brazil actually fell back almost a decade in terms of technological sophistication. They missed out on so much, to the point where those import substitution measures had to be removed and global players have to come. So let's not get scared of global competition, but let's ask, how do we become as competitive? So we don't need any government protection in terms of levies and in terms of taxes.
Okay. We have close to 3 minutes before we take a break. This issue of electronic tax system and e-TIMS, I think it's quite an interesting one, of which we'll need to look at in detail. But before we go to that, briefly, because most of the times we mention the Asian tigers, is that the correct name? When we compare ourselves to Malaysia, you know, at independence, Kenya was here, and we were loaning this country and that country, and now here we are, and we're looking up to them. What did they do different that we can learn and sort of infuse in our policy? And also some of the changes that we've seen with this Finance Act 2023, is it towards emulating some of these countries that have been able to make strides?
Well, I think much has happened in those countries, possibly best described in Singapore's leader's book, Lee Kuan Yew. I think is one of the books almost all policymakers in Kenya read and talk about. And what they really achieved was they managed to make those countries into become export giants, manufacturing giants. So countries that used to import now became, if you think of countries, companies like Samsung, you know, these are companies that really export everything from phones to refrigerators. So they managed to build a huge human capital. They managed to organize themselves to become huge manufacturing giants, and now they export to the rest of the world that type of technology. I think Kenya can follow that path of becoming producers. It doesn't have to be in tech, it could be in agriculture, it could be in agro-processing, but I think it's an interesting path that Kenya can explore.
Definitely. That's very encouraging. So I don't know, how many minutes do you have, Mr. Director, in regards before we take a short break? A minute. Yeah, I was tempted for that minute as we breathe, yeah? Just to remind you, it's such a wonderful world. I mean, some of us, when we started the year, Ken, you know, we set out goals to achieve in the year 2023, and now you've just realized, oh, August is done. We are in the last quarter of the year. Ken, did you set up goals? Have you achieved them briefly this 1 minute before we go for a break?
I did, but I think something interesting that I advise a lot of people is sometimes to set these goals in July at the half year. There's much reason to that, particularly business goals for a business owner. And people ask, why is that the reason? I always say the government's financial cycle begins in July. So you want to align your company strategy with the government spending strategy. So sometimes this whole myth that everything must start in January has to be debunked. I think many times you'll find July, particularly for financial goals, can be a good time. So for some people, this could be the beginning of setting those goals.
That's encouraging. In fact, I'm taking that up. Now I've just started on my on my first quarter of my year because I'm going with the government financial year arrangement. But we take a short break right here on Business Today. When we come back, we dig deeper into this electronic tax system and many other stories. Remember, it's a wonderful and beautiful world, and this is Business Today. Stay tuned.